Welcome to this video on an excursion from Game Premiere and Severance Episode 3, Who is Alive? Just drop us deeper into the Lumon rabbit hole. And let me tell you, things are getting weird. We saw Cobel's journey, Innie's mark, desperate search, and a whole lot of clues that have left us with more questions than answers. If you feel lost in the maze of hallways and unanswered questions, you're not alone. In this video, we're going to break down every scene, dissect those cryptic conversations, and explain the hidden details you might have missed. Welcome and let's begin.
Who are you?
Alright, let's dive into this episode, and right off the bat, we're hit with a scene that perfectly embodies the atmosphere of Severance. Miss Cobel waking up in her car, in the middle of the road. Now remember, the end of episode 2 had her speeding away after that tense encounter with Mark. This opening with her sleeping is a representation of her fall from grace. She's no longer the in control, imposing figure we saw at Lumon. She's vulnerable, she's on the run. And the beautiful yet eerie cinematography as she wakes up in the road, as she sees the respiratory mask that is linked to her mother, I believe, really emphasize that isolation, which is why she decides to go back to Lumon. This feels less like a strategic move and more like a desperate play for any hand of control. We can see how this is a woman on the edge. So let's talk about that car scene for a second, because it's a perfect example of show don't tell. We're not told Cobel is losing it, but the filming, her sleeping in the car, she's homeless, she's being haunted by something. It all paints a picture of a woman whose world is breaking down. And this is beautiful storytelling. We're getting a ton of information about Cobel's mental state without a single word. Then we shift gears to Outie Mark, and this is where things get really interesting. He's trying to communicate with his Innie using that counting method to see how he can show a message in his eyes, and the fact that he's doing it out in the open, trying to count in broad daylight, it shows how desperate he is. He's throwing caution to the wind. He needs answers about Gemma, and he's willing to risk everything to get them, even though he understands from his conversation that this is not going to work. But here's where this episode really starts to mess with our heads, and it relates to the idea of comprehension lag. We were seeing Mark try this counting thing, but we, the audience, don't fully understand how it's supposed to work and when and how. The episode is intentionally withholding information, making us feel just as confused and frustrated as Mark is. It's a clever way to put us in his shoes, but it also creates that sense of unease that Severance does so well. Now we see Innie Mark, and we see the surge for Miss Casey, the urgency which they are printing out the picture, Elena's determination. It's clear they're doing this for Mark, and let's talk about that scene with Dylan where he is immediately asked by Miss Huang the way this is shot and the environment of the security room, claustrophobia and control. Dylan, who's used to having a bit more autonomy, at least within the confines of the severed floor, is now completely at the mercy of Lumon. Then he's confronted with this visitation event with his wife, or his Outie's wife. On the surface, this seemed like a kind move, but think about it. It's a manipulation tactic. They're using his family in front of him, reminding him of what he's missing on the outside and to behave, to have this privilege. But in a way, that's completely controlled by Lumon. And the fact that he doesn't know who she is, asking these basic questions, is heartbreaking. It highlights the fundamental tragedy of Severance. It steals people of their relationships, their memories, their very sense of self. This is a prime example of the kind of emotional gut punch that Severance is incredible at. So by the end of this first part of the episode, we have got Cobel on the run, but returning, Outie Mark desperate for answers, Innie Mark starting his search, and a glimpse into the emotional toll that Severance takes on individuals and their families, and the mystery of Gemma's fate. Also the true purpose of Cold Harbor and the extent of Lumon's control are still very much up in the air. So we left off with Mark dealing with the implications of the attempted communication with his Innie and the unsettling reward given to Dylan. Now we shift gears to a scene that on the surface seems almost mundane, and that's Ricken's book. But as always in Severance, there's a lot more going on beneath the surface. First off, the unsettling itself is interesting. is this almost brightly lit room. This is contrast with the darker, more mysterious tone of other scenes. It's like Lumon is trying to project this image of normalcy, of everything being fine, even as things are clearly falling apart. Then we have Natalie. Now, remember, she's essentially the mouthpiece of the board, and her presence here at Ricken, of all places, is a power move, Lumon extending his reach into the personal life of his employees, even those who are technically outies, and the way she talks about the book as having a profound effect on the workers. She's trying to do the opposite, trying to contain it, to control the narrative. This scene is a masterclass on how to imply power and control without stating it. Even Devon's reaction to all of this is crucial. Obviously, she's clearly suspicious, and that little aside to Mark about not telling him, this is a sign that obviously she's starting to see through Lumon's facade. She's recognizing that there's something deeply wrong with this whole situation. And that brings us to those Kier paintings in Milchick's office. What a bizarre and disturbing detail. They're so out of place, so intentionally offensive. On one level, they further help Lumon. The company ideology is not just about control and conformity. It has this deeply ingrained problematic bias, but on another level, those paintings could be a hinting at something more specific about Kier Egan's philosophy. Is this a more recent addition by a board that's trying to tarnish his name? This could be very well an intentional choice to make Kier seem less like a desirable figure or the opposite. Either way, these are questions we should be asking, and they add another drop to the mystery. Now the scene with Mark and Rick Harvey, you can feel Mark's desperation. He's finally ready to face the reality about Gemma, no matter how painful it might be. She's putting Mark in danger. Obviously, we know Rick Harvey believe in this cause and believe that the answers need to come out. And that brings us to the final scene or sequence. Mark is on that table, the monitors are showing those brainwave and her cryptic questions. It's all designed to create a sense of unease, of something profoundly unnatural happening. All of those questions and how he's losing his grip on his identity. The two halves of his mind are bleeding into each other, and that final question, who are you, is the question of the entire series. The fact that Mark can answer it and how the episode ends, that's incredible. It shows us that reintegration is not just about merging memories, it's about fundamentally changing who a person is. It's about creating a brand new person. Another part of the episode, and that is the visit to the gold department, which is another key scene in this episode. The gold lady initially denies to help Mark and Hallie, but she changes her mind after they appeal to her empathy. The scene highlights the importance of human connection, even in the bizarre environment of Lumon. It also suggests that there's still some level of independent thought and compassion left in the severed employees, even those who are not part of MDR. Also, this raises a lot of several questions. What is the purpose of the goats? Why are they being kept in such a strange, almost ritualistic setting? And why there's a man in a goat costume? The more question begins. So this episode ends on a major cliffhanger with Mark undergoing the reintegration, so the possibility of a unified self, but also the potential for a complete loss of identity. Next question from the premiere, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye, one.